A hearing was held by the House Oversight and Accountability Committee's Government Operations and the Federal Workforce Subcommittee to examine federal agency telework and productivity rates. The stories of agency leaders about the benefits of pandemic-era telework policies for their operations were mostly positive. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett slammed the Republican inaction and infighting will cause federal workers and all Americans to suffer because there is still no deal in sight to keep our federal government open. Happen Just Now Enjoy hearing your thoughts. Please leave comments. Thanks.
I think we could save a lot of time if Congress worked remotely, because I know time and money. Because I know that it takes me almost 3 hours to get here from Dallas. I've got another freshman colleague that is from Hawaii, and we all know what happened in Hawaii here recently. And she travels and leaves her husband and her 2 boys to get here, yet seemingly showing up to work doesn't necessarily mean that you're gonna get anything done. Because the last time I checked, we are currently facing a government shutdown.
What is on the line for American people, for government workers, if the government shuts down come October?
Right. Alicia, I'm so glad you asked that question, because I think in all of the coverage we've seen and what we've been talking about, because it's important to talk about, is pointing out the political repercussions that McCarthy will face. But really what we have to be talking about is what the American people will face, because there's no undermining that. There's no saying that, sure, a government shutdown can happen, the American people will never notice. That's not true. So many things will come to a halt. So many things won't get done. There will be people who work for our government who will not get paid. Of course, there are important parts of our government that will survive or try to survive this. But depending on the length of this shutdown, depending on the scope of it, there are so many people that will have their lives impacted, not just from just getting paid, but certain services that they rely on, certain contracts that companies and even parts of the government and other parts of the country depend on. There are so many repercussions beyond just what we've been talking about, which is just the political repercussions that McCarthy is facing.
Yeah,
it is pending, and people have shown up, but they have not shown up to actually do the work. So we're concerned about telework, but what we really need to be concerned about is whether or not we're going to do our work when we're in the building, because we are the ones that are supposed to make sure that we pass appropriations bills so that we can fund what you're doing as we talk about backlogs. So let me talk about some of the reasons for some of the backlogs that have been brought up. By a show of hands, I'm curious to know, any of your agencies, are they at 100% capacity as it relates to having the workforce that you need? No one? Ain't none of y'all got 100 people? Oh, okay. So maybe you need some money so that you can hire some people. Let me also ask you, and I know that it was brought up a little bit earlier, I believe it was you, Mr. Dorman, that talked about the fact that you are looking at what private industry is doing and competing. Is it not true, and anyone who feels like I am stating a falsehood, please say something. Is it not true that the majority of private industry is offering flexibility and better pay than the federal government right now? Okay, all right, so it is hard to compete because number one, we ain't giving y'all no money. Number two, we're showing up every day, but we not doing our jobs because we seemingly are about to shut down, because I don't know how I'm just a freshman. But from what I've been told, I don't know how we're gonna get through 12 appropriation bills in all this time, especially when we keep cutting votes back because they don't have the votes. So we may need to focus on how we can do better at our jobs and support you so that y'all can take care of our constituents. So with that, there are options on the table. Republicans and Democrats, we need to come together and find common ground. And we did this a little earlier this year. I was working on a retention option because in June, I led a letter to the Secretaries of Defense and State and the OPM director about concerns regarding the retention of federally employed military spouses. This letter was co-led by a Republican actually on my oversight committee. I also introduced an amendment to the NDAA directing the Secretary of Defense to provide employment flexibility to military spouses deployed by the department. This amendment was co-sponsored by several Republicans, including, again, one on oversight. The military is currently facing a recruitment crisis. This is why it's important More important than ever that we retain current military families. Over 1/3 of active duty military families cite difficulties securing spousal employment as a reason for leaving the service. In fact, in the past decade, military spouses have experienced persistently high unemployment rates, hovering around 21%, nearly 7 times the national average. Consider Jessica, a military spouse of 19 years, currently stationed at Fort Bliss, Texas, with her active duty spouse. Jessica is a senior passport specialist with the State Department. Her husband recently submitted his Army retirement packet because his transfer order meant Jessica wouldn't be able to work at State because it doesn't offer remote or telework flexibilities. How is this protecting our country? And I'm sure the majority of you never heard about this bipartisan amendment. You heard about all the other trash that they wanted to put on the floor that had nothing to do with keeping our country safe. What we need to do is focus in on the priorities, and the priorities aren't culture wars.
So nowadays, when you watch Republicans campaign against Democrats, they don't campaign much on what they used to, which was, the Democrats were big spenders or whatever, It's all about critical race theory,
Sure.
and it's all this cancel culture stuff.
Yes, the biggest problem.
Why does it work, and what should Democrats do? Are they falling for a bait in doing this and talking about these issues?
I don't know if they're falling for a bait, but I think, again, I don't even think half of the Republicans that do it even mean it. I think they think it works. Emotion.
Right.
What would you do if you were out of governing ideas? If you didn't know how to govern a country of this magnitude and a country of this diversity, and you basically are running on government is broken, and then when you get in office, you have to be terrible to prove the original premise, it must be great to be able to do that. This government doesn't work, and by me not funding it and breaking it, see what I told you? Keep me in power. If you don't have ideas on governing, what do? Well, you do the purposeful distortion field that they create.
But it works,
and by the way,
right? Because it's emotional.
Does it work?
I don't know.
Who's the president?
Well, but
it doesn't necessarily work. It gets people upset. It gets them angry. It makes them fearful about threats and hyperbole, and makes them afraid of things that can't even really be defined. Meanwhile, ignoring so many issues that,
right, it's a kind of real appeal to a base that you stoke up.
Right.
When Sarah Huckabee Sanders did the response to the State of the Union, I noticed she kept talking about CRT. She didn't even bother to spell it out. Because most people, I would assume most average Americans don't know what it means.
The guy who came up with that's purposeful. His plan is make everything CRT. And by the way, all this diversity initiatives and CRT and all those other things are only there because we refuse to actually fix the real problem. The diversity and equity initiatives are a salve. They're to pacify and mollify, because we won't actually do the real thing. We won't actually dismantle the vestiges of all the systemic racism and all the systemic classism and all the systemic gender issues. We won't actually dismantle that. But what we will do is, you can have an office in the building, and every few months, we're going to have to sit and listen to you talk for an hour. And so we're good, right? It's a country that won't face the I'll explain it the NFL, right? You know the Rooney Rule? The Rooney Rule in the NFL is, because there are so few African American coaches, you have to at least interview one of them. So that's the rule now. It's the thing you put in place instead of looking at the owner's box and realizing, oh, right, that's just the legacy of the economic segregation that's been in our country since its founding. So we're never going to deal with that. So here's what we are going to do. A diversity and equity initiative, we're going to have to talk to one black guy. So are we good? I think we're good. But that's what I'm trying to say is, we don't the thing that they're pointing at is the thing that's in place because we won't do the actual thing.
That's not the priorities. The priorities are making sure that people are working and people are safe. And regardless of what the president said, and I love the president, I support him. Let me say that right now. COVID is still around. We have members that are out right now because they are sick with COVID. So for those that missed the memo, COVID does still exist, and these flexibilities allow people to not only be safe, but they also make sure that we are keeping our country safe. So thank you for what you do every day. Thank you for putting up with these questions. Thank you for fighting for a country that somehow doesn't seem like it's fighting half as hard for you and your employees. And with that, I would just ask for unanimous consent to enter into the record a statement from the Parallel Professionals, EFM, MOH, and the U.S. Department of State Employee Organizations for the spouses, partners of foreign service professionals who are civil servants, government contractors, and who work at U.S. missions abroad. Mr. Chairman.
That'll be under the record. Thank you very much.
And I will yield.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe to Happen Just Now for more content about accountability of all public officials and policy and procedures.